Hello, everyone. Welcome, and I hope your week goes well or has gone well. I hope your weekend went well. I'm so stoked to have this gentleman, Chris Boardman, who for decades was a master of emotional manipulation, using a baton and a score to tell audiences when to feel joy, suspense, and heartbreak. His genius shaped the sound of over 100 iconic films like Die Hard, A Lethal Weapon, earning him an Academy Award nomination for The Color Purple and 6 Emmy Awards. Renowned as that rare musician who could write anything, he collaborated with legends like Quincy Jones to Barbra Streisand. Oh my God, my brother's going to love that. Tackling every project with unparalleled integrity and passion, his legacy was cemented not just by awards, but by the deep respect of his peers, like the late Michael Kamen, who called Chris the lifesaver, who helped finish Lethal Weapon at 11th hour, which is pretty good. But when PTSD shattered his own life in 2019, this master storyteller realized he had been using his profound understanding of the human nervous system for the wrong industry. He made a profound pivot, transforming his decades of Hollywood expertise into a lifeline for those suffering from anxiety and depression. And this is very important, Chris. This new mission was a natural extension of his lifelong role as a mentor, evidenced by 6 year tenure as director of the media writing and production program at the University of Miami's Frost School of Music, where he was twice nominated for Mentor of the Year. Now, through his company SoundBridge Health, Chris brings a lifetime of expertise from the scoring stage to the public stage. He teaches a revolutionary 7-minute protocol that uses sound, breath, and movement to reset the nervous system, a method with a remarkable 91% success rate. He left the pinnacle of Hollywood success in search of purpose, and in doing so, is changing the future of mental health care. That's very important. Chris Boardman is a storyteller, a mentor, and a true master of his craft who now uses his powers not for spectacle, but for healing. So please join me in welcoming this incredible, accomplished 6-time Emmy and probably more Emmy Award winner, Chris Boardman. Pleased to meet you, Chris.
Pleased to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for gracing our podcast tonight. Really appreciate it. I love your background there.
I don't pay much attention to it. It's kind of old news. It's from a
Yeah.
previous lifetime, but that's okay.
So let's go back to the beginning. So, what was a defining moment you chose your path in movies and in scoring, and then what brings you here now?
Well, it's been said about me that I didn't choose music; music chose me. The family story goes that when I was 3.5 years old, I asked my parents for a piano for my 4th birthday. And they rented a piano. There was no music in the house. My dad was a scientist, and I immediately started playing by ear the day the piano arrived. So I studied piano as a child, and actually was taken to an audition for Juilliard when I was 10 years old, unbeknownst to me who I was playing for. And Juilliard wanted me. They were going to accept me, and my parents didn't want to move to New York. So the wild thing about it was I didn't learn about that audition until I was probably 60 years old. My parents kept it secret. So I got interested in popular music after that because I was studying classical piano. Started writing songs, and then I got interested in writing for ensembles as opposed to writing just for a combo or a rhythm section, as we used to call it. And thought that, wow, it would be kind of fun to write music for television and for movies. And I met a guy at a clinic named Billy Byers. Billy Byers was a first call trombone player in New York in the 50s. And a legendary arranger who worked with everyone in the business. And he was a huge success on Broadway later in his life. He was making jazz records prior to that. And we developed a mentor protege relationship starting when I was about 17, 18 years old. And we subsequently ended up becoming writing partners for 10 years. And at the time, this is mid to late 70s, and musical variety and was big, and he was like one of the prominent arrangers of musical variety at the time. And so I started working with him doing variety shows and doing Las Vegas and touring with acts like Mitzi Gaynor and Tom Jones and the rest.
Mm.
And then in the early 80s, I had always wanted to work in film, but I didn't really know how to make that transition. And my copyist, Bill Hughes, recommended me to Ralph Burns, another noted arranger who did all of Bob Fosse's orchestrations on
Mm.
Broadway and
Wow.
movies, to orchestrate a film that he was composing. That led to me being befriended by his music editor, a remarkable woman by the name of Elsa Blankstead, who was like the Jewish mother to all the Hollywood composers.
Mm.
And she actually convinced Bruce Broughton to hire me to orchestrate Silverado, which is a legendary score in Hollywood history, in 1985. And some 4 or 5 months after that, Quincy called because he needed help on The Color Purple. Now, we had met Quincy and I, Johnny Mandel introduced me to Quincy Jones, or referred me to Quincy Jones. And I still remember the phone call, picking up the phone and hearing this guy say, "Hey, man, it's Quincy," on the other end. And no sooner did I hang up the phone than Johnny called me and said, "Has Quincy called yet?" I said, "Yeah, I just got off the phone with him." And he said, "Oh, damn, I want you to work for me this week." Now, I met Johnny through Byers. Billy and Johnny were lifelong friends. They worked together as 21-year-olds on Your Show of Shows with Sid Caesar in the early 50s.
Mm.
And so I got to know Johnny through his relationship with Billy. And when Quincy put out the distress call on the Wiz, Johnny referred me. And so fast forward to 1985, when Quincy called, he already knew me. He knew of my work because I worked on The Wiz, and I did The Color Purple, which resulted in an Oscar nomination the following spring. So that was my entree into the film business, is doing Silverado, then The Color Purple, and then a couple of years after that, I started doing my own films under my own name. And that actually, was in the 80s. I was on kind of a rocket ship ride. And the curious part about that whole thing was, in 1986, I got nominated for an Oscar. I won an Emmy Award, and I had a hit record on jazz radio. And I got divorced.
Oh.
And I had a 4-year-old son at the time, and I became a single parent. So I realized I needed to be a dad more than I needed to pursue a career. So I organized my life around his schedule. And so at the time, there was a lot of work. And I had a reputation as being somebody who was fast, who was good, and always would deliver a high quality product. So there was never any lack of work during those years, but I didn't necessarily pursue or try to leverage that impact of The Color Purple and Silverado, because I was more interested in being a dad. So I just took work that was convenient.
I take it that's the one with Oprah Winfrey, right?
Yep.
And did you meet her, and what was she like?
Interesting. That's a kind of a cute story. I didn't meet Oprah at the time, but I was co-producing a record with David Foster, a young pianist named William Joseph, and David he was a musical director of an event called the Carousel Ball, which was the highlight of the social calendar in Beverly Hills. And, we used to call David Benefit Boy, because he would showcase all of his new artists at all these benefits that he would do. So William ended up performing, and so I went to this event to support my act at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, and there's a little small dressing room or green room off to the side of the stage, and Oprah was there, and she was going to give an award to Halle Berry. So I'm standing in the same room, which is about 10 by 12, with Oprah, and I waited until she was finished rehearsing her speech. And you can't necessarily see it, but on the wall behind me, there's a picture of the Oscar nominees luncheon. It's on the same wall as the Emmys. Oh. And it was taken at the Beverly Hilton because that's where the luncheon was. But that was 25 years later that I saw her in the green room. So I picked my moment, and I introduced myself, and I said, I got a picture of you and me together in this very room taken 25 years ago. And she was shocked, and she stared at me and said, "Get out of town." She couldn't believe it because she knew exactly what I was talking about. And, it's like sometimes people get starstruck,
Yeah.
Right? I have never experienced that level of intensity from another human being.
Wow.
The entire focus of her being was on me, and it was so powerful that I had to look away. I couldn't retain eye contact. And then she got very reverential and very quiet, and we had a short little conversation after that. But that was the only time I've met Oprah.
Wow, that's a great, beautiful story. So besides Quincy Jones and Oprah Winfrey, who was the most, I don't know if you're allowed to even mention it, but who was the most difficult one to work with that you just were so happy that you didn't have to work with them again?
Oh, I'm not a sour grapes guy, and I don't necessarily recall those kinds of experiences. It's a funny thing working with these entertainers and artists because they're all complicated. I mean, come on, what compels a person to want to stand up in front of an audience and expose themselves to that degree? Right. So, I was there to do a job. I focused on doing the job I could do and to do it as best as I could and just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah. I remember when you're talking about 1986, I actually went downtown Toronto that one particular Saturday to visit my brother. That was the exact same day, coincidence, that actor Martin Sheen was filming Believers. And I bump into the guy, and my brother happened to have a camera, which he never has that time. So it was a perfect moment. And there's a picture of me and Martin Sheen when I'm like 21 years old, and he's like 59 and just standing there. And I was just like so starstruck and everything. And it was just amazing. I was the only big celebrity I've ever met. And he's a nice guy. I bet you he's even kind to work with as well.
Yeah. I mean, to just another point about that, I got hired to be the musical director of a multi-million-dollar nightclub act, basically a touring Broadway show at age 22. And I had never seen a nightclub act nor conducted a band before. And I dove into this, and, luckily for me, I was able to make it go and do a good job. But I can't remember just having this overriding feeling of, why me? Do I really deserve this? Right. And, I'm talking with friends, and, these artists, they're not gods. They're just people. They put on their pants one leg at a time, just like everybody else. So it's I always try to keep in mind that there are people underneath the veneer, the facade, or as George Clooney said the other day in an interview, says, when I go out in public, I have to wear the celebrity suit.
I like that.
You
That's
know,
awesome.
and
I
and
always
so
like that
so it's,
guy.
you know, they're just people. They're just different.
Mhm.
You know, and I've found that if you treat people with kindness and respect, uh, you know, there's really never any issue. If you walk into a situation like that with a specific expectation, you know, or you let your ego or your insecurity get out in front of you, then it could, the results are not necessarily going to be as positive or as productive.
Yeah, I know somewhere you said that you went from manipulating emotion in film to facilitating healing with music. What was the catalytic moment that made you see your musical gift in this entirely new light?
Well, yeah, the so I got hired to teach college, right, at the University of Miami. And I got hired based on my resume, not my academic experience. I don't have a college degree.
Hmm.
And here I am, an assistant professor running a college program responsible for 50 students, and
Wow.
and you know, just diving in the deep end, and you know, have to figure it out, you know, wing it and figure out how to make it go. And that's something that I've found that I'm actually very good at, is finding solutions, creative solutions to problems. So that experience turned from being a complete novice into turning my program into top 10 in the world for that type of commercial music program,
Hmm.
uh, maxing out the student population in terms of what I had to limit it due to space sizes, and turning away 100 students a year who wanted to be in the program. And for whatever reason, my boss decided he wanted to let me go. The only thing I can think of is I was too bright a bulb in the box, taking too much
Hmm.
attention away from him. And in a contract negotiation discussion, he tried to intimidate me,
Hmm.
and I called him on it, and he erupted in a narcissistic rage to the extent that to this day I believe that if he had a weapon, I could be dead.
Ooh.
It was that horrifying, that terrorizing.
Gee.
So I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked out of his office, never spoke to him again, had to work for the university for another year.
Hmm.
And I found myself making sure that whenever I left my classroom to see if his car was parked in the parking lot, so I could avoid him.
Oh.
And it took me about 7 or 8 months to realize that I was exhibiting classic symptoms of PTSD from that experience in his office. And yeah, and so you know, I'm opening up my email about 7 8 months later, and there's a email from his office. Obviously, a mistake on a listserv, but it sent me into a panic attack. I mean, literally a panic attack, holding my head in my hands, trying to calm myself down. At the same time, I hear my wife pick up the phone, and I know that there's something horribly wrong. So I go to see her in the kitchen. What's going on? And she hangs up the phone, and she said that was her step brother, or her brother. His 19-year-old stepson had committed suicide the night before. And I
Hmm.
was convinced that it was an at-risk nephew who was drinking and drugging and, you know, carousing. That was the nephew who had died. And it turns out it was the goody two shoes nephew who had died, and I couldn't put it together. I was adamant and convinced that the wrong nephew had passed away, and
Hmm.
that was a trigger that said I've got a problem to deal with. So So that's where this whole PTSD thing started. And, you know, I tried to find a therapist, was unsuccessful. I talked to friends. I was introduced to an EMDR therapist. Tried that. That was helpful to a degree, but it didn't really didn't really help me all that much. And after I left the university, excuse me, I was the most crucial question that I needed to answer was, how do I want to spend my time? It's like, the older you get, time becomes more important. And so I went through this process, and I thought, well, I climbed a lot of mountains. I've, got a lot of notches on the gun belt. One thing that I had not done in music was write a piece for the concert hall. So, I'm thinking, well, let's write like a 7-8 minute piece of music as kind of a trial balloon to see what this is all about. And I was searching around for a theme, and I couldn't figure out what this should be about, because, knowing full well that if there's not a story attached to a piece of music, it's kind of meaningless. It's very difficult for people to grab hold of and to give me the direction as to what to write. So I'm sitting there going through what is this going to be? What is this going to be? And then there was a news announcement about a shooting at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Westlake, California, which was a college hangout, where 13 people died and 16 people were injured. And I immediately realized that I could use my musical storytelling skills to express and illustrate what I was feeling as a PTSD sufferer, and expose that to other people who had no idea what people who were suffering from that sort of brain injury, as it turns out it was. And that was the catalyst that moved me past, into this mindset of turning my personal pain into purpose, of saying, I can do something, I can make an impact. Let's go see where this goes. So, my original concept was to write I pitched the idea to the Nashville Symphony, and they said that when I asked them, well, how would you program a piece like this? And they said, well, it sounds like an hour feature. So it immediately went from 8 minutes to 60 minutes long, with a film components and all the, this whole big production. And so I started to work on it and had the whole business plan and the whole 9 yards. And my premiere date was June 1st, 2020. And COVID hit and everything stopped. So I put it down for a while. And then I was talking with a friend who was treasurer of the symphony at the time, the following year, and asking him, well, so what's up with the symphony? And he said, well, he's expressing his frustrations with the symphony board, who thought that by the fall of 2021, we'd be back to 100% normal, and this guy was a co-founder of AutoZone. And he was saying, voicing his frustrations, and he says, guys, who knows what's going to happen? We got to roll this out piecemeal so we don't get caught signing pay or play contracts with all these artists and have to pay them and have nobody come into the theater. So that led to me. I'm sorry that's so long-winded, but it's just how I got to this point today. So I ended up, couldn't find anybody to collaborate with, so I wrote a 70-page script that outlined a story that I created about two families and the story begins immediately after a school shooting, and then the pandemic hits, and how these two different families cope with the aftermath of PTSD, the pandemic. I ended up creating an hour-long piece of music, demoed it as a synth mock-up, which is something I did for years, and then recorded 5 voiceover actors reading the dialogue, because the concept for the piece was to have 5 actors sitting on stage in front of a symphony orchestra with a visual component that was designed to give a visual reference to the geography of where the characters were. It's kind of a poor man's immersive event. I couldn't get anybody to book this show, so I shifted my focus to part of that whole process, which was an outreach program into schools to get this message out and to try to get school kids to participate and come to the concert hall. So when I realized that it was kind of a lost cause trying to push this big project forward, I started working on how do I create something that I can take into schools to teach kids how to use music to be able to help them. And I did about 9 or 10 months of intense research into how the brain responds to sound. And out of that, I created a intervention that uses music that people know, as opposed to mindfulness music, which is derived from an Asian culture. And I said, well, I live in the Southeast in Nashville, and, these people aren't going to want to embrace and adopt music from a different culture. So that's just another impediment to engagement, right? So I discovered that the brain reacts to tempo more than it does to musical genre. And so because of that, if your heart is racing and you listen to a piece of music that is slower than your existing heart rate, your brain will change your physiology to match the pace of the music that you're listening to. So that means that your heart rate will slow down to match the pace of the music, as well as change your brainwave activity. It will slow down your brainwave activity at the same time. And at that point, I realized genre doesn't matter. That means that I could use music that people already know, have a relationship to, that is meaningful to them, to trigger long-term memories to release a dopamine rush in the frontal cortex, to mitigate and to interrupt the fight-flight response. It's just mind-blowing to me that this exists in nature. It's not a pill. It's not a long-term therapy approach. It's a skill set that I can teach to people to be able to self-regulate their nervous system. And then you add the breathing, which creates a focus on presence awareness and changes your respiration, as well as using a ritualistic movement like a pre-shot routine to excuse me, I'm getting an alert here, to help stop rumination and self-talk in your brain. So this whole thing together now becomes something that has become SoundBridge Health, which is a prescription digital therapeutic intervention that we're launching after the first of the year, and it can be prescribed by your doctor and is eligible for insurance reimbursement. And we teach people how to identify music that they know, how to practice and integrate this methodology into their daily lives. So that's kind of how I got from being a musician to transitioning into healthcare. And the really, I tell people that this is my purpose. This is not about me making a lot of money or my ego. It's about making an impact and hopefully leaving the world a better place.
Yeah, I was reading about your SoundBridge Health. Chris, what did success mean to you at the height of your Hollywood career, and how has your definition of it fundamentally changed since founding SouthBridge Health?
Well,
My apologies, SoundBridge Health.
no, it's okay. I started receiving a lot of recognition very early in life. And in today's world, you may call it imposter syndrome, but it's not necessarily, it's like, out of all of my peers, like, why was I getting this opportunity? Right? I think, why me? Why am I worthy of this kind of getting this kind of support and opportunity? And it took me the best part of 10 years to realize, well, I chose it as much as it chose me. And to answer your question specifically, at the time, even to this day, this is kind of a recent awareness. I would always hide behind perfection to quell the insecure thoughts. I figured if I could be perfect and do it absolutely the best I could possibly do it, that's all anybody could ask of me. And so, seeing that was my mindset, I mean, it like kind of goes. It relates to being trained as a sideman. For your listeners who have never worked as a musician, when you walk into a recording studio and you're hired to play your instrument on a session, you're expected to walk in the door with a smile on your face, be in your chair before the downbeat, which occurs when the second hand hits the hour, and play the part perfectly. No mistakes. Play it perfectly. That's the expectation. And then be pleasant to work with, and be supportive, and smile and say thank you when it's over and you walk away, right? That's the way I was trained. That was the standard I was trained to, is that there is no room for error. The standards are unbelievably high. And if you don't meet those standards, you'll never work again. So there's a good deal of anxiety and fear associated with that. That's pretty hard, pretty big mountain to climb when you're 22 years old, but that's just the way it was. And so you combine those two things together, and I never really put a lot of stock into the awards because that wasn't my goal. My goal was to stay busy so I could be in the process of making music, that I could use that to assuage the trauma of divorce and the inequities of the music business and all the rest of that. So, I mean, all this stuff that you see behind me is just stuff I've acquired through the years. It was never the goal. The goal was just to do the best job I could do every day. So that has served me well in this transition because, number one, my job, look at it this way. If I spent decades sitting down at the desk, no keyboards, right? Or synth mock-ups or any of that nonsense, sitting in a quiet room at a desk with a blank score page and imagining what I had to do with 100 different people sitting in a room to achieve the outcome that I was tasked to accomplish. Wow. Right. And so, Billy never worked with a piano. So we just sat in a room and just imagined the orchestra playing these notes we were writing. And so what I discovered was my core competency wasn't music. My core competency really was creative problem solving, or critical thinking and creative problem solving. And that enabled me to say, well, okay, I want to be in the tech business. Well, I can apply that knowledge, that core competency, into most any genre, right? Or any industry, without having the fear or being inhibited by something that I didn't know. So I kind of transitioned into technology in the 2000s, into entrepreneurship, launched a couple of startups. My time was awful. It was at the crash of 2008. Worked in as a creative in the technology business, taught school with no prior experience, was able to figure out how to grow the program by 300% in 3 years, strictly by using this ability to take abstract forms, concepts, and to organize them in a way that would solve the problem that I was facing. So that's kind of how I ended up here. And so when I decided that my livelihood, my personal mental health was dependent on me finding a way to focus on purpose to keep me occupied rather than spinning off into the ether, then it's now I have something to replace music, and God knows the healthcare industry is incredibly complicated. So it's always something new to learn, and thankfully I'm a very curious guy. I like to learn new stuff. So it's so far it's working. And at the end of the day, it's just another step on the journey, and who knows where it's going to end up.
Exactly. But Chris, you were like leaving an industry where you were like at absolute top. That's a massive risk. Now, what was the hardest thing to walk away from, and what has been the most surprising reward?
Well, to be honest, I made the choice after in 1999 Napster hit and just decimated the record business.
Mm.
And so, I mean, had it not been for Steve Jobs and Apple and iTunes, the record business would be toast. It just disappear, right? And so living through that, I said, well, my future seems to be, I got to understand what social networking is all about. I got to understand what smartphones are all about. This is like pre-iPhone. And after I got really interested in cultural anthropology, meaning, what are the factors that human beings are going to want to need if the culture turns upside down? And it basically comes down to being loved, having a place, a roof over their head, and having enough to eat, right? And so I focused my attention on that as opposed to how do I try to circle the wagons around a status quo business model that's going to fail. And so it was not necessarily, at the time my visual metaphor was of Hollywood in the mid 2000s was I could see the future being like rats in a cage that's overcrowded, eating their own, trying to retain market share.
Mm-hmm.
And I just chose, I don't want to live my life that way. So I walked away. I said, I don't want to do that anymore. That's not going to, there's other things in life I want to do. I want to live my life a different way. And so I left. I moved to Nashville in 2009.
Wow. So, how did your own experience with PTSD and the healthcare system shape the specific design of the 7-minute protocol? What were you determined to do differently?
Well, so just as an aside, what is the date today? That's July 15th. I had 6 inches of my small intestine removed because I had a carcinoid tumor, the same type of cancer that killed Steve Jobs, removed. And at that time, after the successful surgery, I'm 100% cured, thank God. But I realized two things. Number one, I'm not done yet. There's still a lot for me to do. And number two, I've had an angel on my hands, on my shoulder since I was born. And I mean, reiterate the question. I'm like, I get distracted when I start recalling my history. Pose the question again.
Yeah. So, how did your experience with PTSD and the healthcare system shape the specific design of the 7-minute protocol?
Great. Thank you. Okay,
what were you determined to do differently?
Well, when because of this awareness of how blessed I am, and my gratitude for what has occurred in my life, it's a wild thing that if I listen to that voice, I can find different ways to do things. And in this process of diving into the healthcare industry, I would read, lay awake in bed at night and wonder how in the world am I going to solve this problem and not have an answer. And then almost as by magic, somebody would appear in my life that would answer that question.
Wow.
It was just remarkable. And after it happened a number of times, I finally let go. And so what that does is the only thing is, if doing differently is being aware that I'm on a solid path, that I've got more support for this than I even know can articulate, and that because of my experiences guiding people's emotions with music, communicating to people using music, that is a completely different mindset than the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry is really designed, it's absolutely designed for acute care, meaning I got a broken arm, fix my arm. I've got a blocked artery, do open heart surgery, you're fixed, right? But the culture has shifted to a chronic care need, right? A complete shift. And so it's I'm kind of drifting here. I apologize. But
That's fine.
What it's these thoughts of how this could be different kind of appeared as epiphanies after intense research. I can't necessarily describe it or explain it, but maybe 3-4 times in this process, I've just been sitting there grinding away, trying to figure out a solution to a problem. Then all of a sudden an answer appears. And the turning point came for me when I realized that the determinant factor for music to affect people's emotions is not genre, it's tempo. That opened up the floodgates. That means that if I could help people identify music that was meaningful to them in their lives, they could personalize the process to their own preference to achieve this desired result without any regard to musical idiom. It's like I say, it's I can't necessarily articulate how that thought came to be, but I just know if I grind hard enough and I am tenacious enough and stubborn enough to keep working these problems, I'm fairly confident I'll come up with an answer, at least an answer to move me to the next step, as opposed to being stuck and saying, "Oh, I better fold my tent and go home." So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's true. So your method is described as what healthcare won't teach. What is a critical component that you believe the current mental health system is most consistently missing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, look at the facts. Cognitive behavioral therapy works 30% of the time,
Hmm.
and medication is like a needle in a haystack or throwing a dart, because the brain is so complex that it's really difficult to identify what the specific problem is and take an acute care management model to it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So at least in my opinion, psychotropic medication solves a problem for a short period of time. However, the brain will adapt and accommodate that new input, meaning that you're constantly hitting the moving target with a medication, right? And so that kind of formed my belief that if I could empower people and teach them the basics, the information needed for them to be able to do it themselves, and help them achieve mastery of that process, then that's a coping skill that they could use and adapt throughout their lives, as opposed to being tied or dependent on a medication or the next therapy session, right? It empowers the individual as opposed to giving up personal power to someone else or some other process. So that's what they're really missing. It's healthcare is, at least for the most part, is about monetizing the treatment of symptoms, not necessarily making people well.
Actually, yeah, my friend and I meet at a coffee shop once every weekend, and we talk about this all the time. And I sent him a Dr. Berg video, and like I like all the things Dr. Berg and Eric Westman and everyone talks about this stuff. Um, One of the things is like Alzheimer's. Like, really, you don't take medication for Alzheimer's. All you do is you go on a ketogenic diet or carnivore, and it reverses. And I've heard people who had like uh, 11-inch tumors on their colon that had like 2 months to live. They went on a keto. They went on Helio Health, and they were healed. And 20 years later, the guys,
It's kind of a hit or miss thing. It's absolutely true. Everyone is different. Some people, they don't necessarily respond. Some people do. It's in terms of health in general. I've had 9 different surgeries in my life, and this last time around, I got really adamant about being my own patient advocate, and kind of got the runaround from my primary care physician, who I don't personally have a problem with, but it's more the political structure and the business practices of where he works. And so because of my, he says, well, wait a minute, I don't have to do it. There's other options other than what you tell me. It was 4 months from initially seeing this tumor in a random CT scan to having this surgery, which cured me. Had I waited a year, it probably would have killed me. So I'm a firm believer in personal empowerment, being accountable for your own actions and responsible. And it goes to healthcare too. It goes to your health, everything in your life. It's your choice. It's your responsibility. It's very easy in today's world, because we have bad actors who promote this, to blame other people for your problems. But the reality is it's your choice, right? So I'm going to do everything. So I'm going to do everything that I can do to help people understand and realize that they have a choice to make a good choice. You can't necessarily determine an outcome, but there's no, you hit it straight up, as opposed to being fearful of getting an outcome that you don't want to have.
Wow, this is amazing. So, as a subject matter expert on how the brain perceives sound, what is one surprising scientific fact about music's effect on our biology that most people don't know?
Oh man. Well, it's like what really kind of my aha moment was when I discovered the theory of entrainment, entrainment, entrainment. And what that is a phenomenon of nature that, like, let's say you go to a grandfather clock store, and you have this row of grandfather clocks. What you'll discover is all the pendulums are swinging in sync with one another.
Yeah.
The phenomenon is defined as two objects vibrating at different frequencies will naturally attempt to sync themselves. Okay? That is a proven phenomenon of nature. Now, from a subject matter expert about the brain, which is where your question came from, if you're anxious, let's say, and your heart rate is elevated, or if you are exposed to some sort of threat, when you're exposed to threat, your brain in this case, sound. Let's say you hear a car crash, or you have some sort of threatening noise, or ominous low cello line in a film score. It's telling your brain that there's a threat here. And what happens when your brain receives that sensory input? It says, "Oh, you're potentially under threat." That will send a brain a neurotransmission to your amygdala, which is the perception center of the brain. And the amygdala is tasked with saying, is this real? Is this momentary? Do I need to prepare myself to survive? That's the job of the amygdala. So when the amygdala says, oh, this is a threat, and we have to prepare ourselves, I need to prepare the body to defend itself, then what that does is trigger something called the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the adrenal glands, to secrete hormones, which changes your physiology. Right? Your eyes dilate, your breath, and you start to pant, you hear more acutely, all your senses are on hyper alert due to this hormonal secretion to prepare the body to defend itself. Okay? This is part of the autonomic nervous system. It's an involuntary response. It's not something that you can use your mind or your ego or your conscious self to mitigate. It's how the body is wired to go into defense mode. So let's say you feel like you're stressed, or you're under threat, or you hear a loud car crash, or you hear a bunch of gunshots, or whatever it may be. Your brain is going to interpret those sounds as being threat, and it will secrete these hormones. So in relating to the term entrainment, if you're in a state of heightened alert, all these hormones are going to cause your heart rate to increase. It's going to cause all these sorts of reactions in your body. Muscles will tighten. Your breath will become shallow. All this stuff is going to happen. So my thought process was to say, if I can use this theory of entrainment to break and interrupt the autonomic nervous system's response to threat, then I can reduce the hormonal secretions caused by the brain perceiving a sound or something as being something to defend. And that's, people don't talk about that. That's a fairly novel concept. I have to say, I have yet, in the last 6 months, I must have pitched 30 doctors. I have gotten zero pushback on the science supporting this methodology. So it's evidence-based, it's sound, it works. So I talked to a primary care physician last Wednesday. He said these poor guys are drowning. I mean, they're literally drowning in their jobs. He said he saw 28 patients the day before in clinic. He says, I got 8 minutes per patient. Right? And so it's they have limited options. They can prescribe medication or refer to a therapist. That's it. So what SoundBridge is designed to do is to fill that gap in care and bring all of this knowledge through an educational process in this protocol to teach people how to harness music, entrainment, breathing techniques, and ritualistic movement like a pre-shot routine in athletics, to be able to teach them, if it's 2:00 in the morning and I'm panicked out of my mind and I got nobody to call, I can open up my phone and listen to a piece of music and do this whole protocol and calm myself down whenever I need it. And I don't have to call the doctor. I don't have to feel powerless in response.
So when you talk about sound and talking about music in the brain, like, I wonder if songwriters know that a lot of their songs sometimes will hit people the right way and others won't? It's like,
Oh well, that's a really interesting question because yes, the answer is yes, they do. Will they be able to articulate it? Yeah, probably not, because
okay.
they don't understand the science behind it. See,
Hmm.
my altruistic goal here with SoundBridge is not just to provide a stopgap treatment option. It's to remind people that if you listen with intent, there is value in what you're doing, and shift the focus from random song selection based on a anecdotal response. Oh, this song makes me feel this way, so whenever I feel that way, I'm going to listen to this song. Is to teach people to say, well, that's really valuable. You can use that song at this, if you know when to use it, to be able to change your physiology, to change your emotions,
Hmm.
right? So and at the end of the day, if you learn, this is my opinion. If you understand that music has intrinsic value to you in your life, and you learn to listen with intent to a specific piece of music, you will listen to other people differently. Instead of waiting to reply, you will actually hear what the other person is saying, and thereby creating a different level of connection between the person you're listening to.
Is it the music or the singing or the lyrics? Because I know there's a lot of music. Well, for instance, classical music, Moonlight Sonata, beautiful Beethoven. If that really changed your physiology and makes you feel good and maybe change the trajectory of your life, what does heavy metal do to you?
Well, there again, it's related to tempo. I mean, loud, obnoxious, angry music, will have an effect, of course. But what is the result that you're trying to achieve by that?
Mm.
Music therapists talk about the fact that if you're sad, some people go to listening to a sad song to help them, reassure them that they are not alone in their sadness, that somebody else feels the same way. So if you're angry and disillusioned and all the rest of that, and you gravitate towards an angry piece of music, it actually kind of reinforces your mindset,
Hmm.
right? So this is the thing, is I never wanted to be in a position where I was pushing something new to an audience, to a patient. I would much rather educate them how to use what they already resonate with to achieve a desired outcome.
What do you say to skeptics in the medical community who might view music as medicine as an alternative or less serious treatment?
I said, it's like I've do a lot of. I'm aware of emerging trends. Music as
Hmm.
medicine is growing daily in terms of the science behind it, and that kind of, your question kind of leads to a conditioned response based on their training, right? So it's not necessary. People who are skeptics, it's fine to be skeptical, but to be dismissive means that they don't have an open mind,
Hmm.
right? So their personal bias is forming that opinion. And in the healthcare community, they're it's basically designed based on statistical research. They're looking at numbers. How many patients did this? How many patients did that? Did it actually do what it
Hmm.
said it was going to do? And so it's a way for them to justify their decision by saying, oh, well, I was prescribed this medication or I did this procedure because the preponderance of the evidence says that this is the right thing to do. In terms of music as medicine, we just haven't gotten there yet. But all the studies, I mean, you talked about Alzheimer's and dementia. It's proven that music reaches dementia patients, right?
I
Just
know.
as an example.
Mhm. Go ahead.
No. I'm just saying that it's and the other thing about it is people are getting sicker, and we're in the midst of a mental health crisis in this country.
Yeah, I always ask that question to my artists. So, how do you deal with your mental health? But when you're talking about a story about music and dementia, yeah, there's this elderly man who used to be a singer. He used to listen to music and everything, but he was so out of it with dementia that a nurse, whatever, started singing to him, playing his favorite music, and he started singing to it. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
it sort of like
Well, here's the
changes you.
thing. This is the point of leverage of SoundBridge intervention. Is that okay? So the reason why for a boomer or a person of a specific generation, the music
Hmm.
of their youth sticks with them for the rest of their life, right? Is because when you're coming of age, you are more emotional than you are at other times in your life. And so the music that you listen to when you're 12 to 18 years old is going to have a deeper impact and be ingrained in your long-term memory. And so this is a core tenet of what we're doing with SoundBridge Health, is helping people identify music that was popular at a specific tempo range that is associated with their coming of age years, as a way of triggering memories to help give a positive specific outcome.
Hmm. Yeah. Music, like you can't live without music. They say life is music, love is music. So, Chris, when you watch a film like Die Hard or Lethal Weapon now, with your new perspective, what do you hear in your own scores that you didn't recognize at the time?
Oh, that's kind of a loaded question. It's kind of like playing jazz. When you're there in the trenches and you're trying to find a solution, sometimes you hit, you play a good lick, sometimes you don't. And so listening back on all that stuff, first of all, I don't do it, because that's in the past. I'm more interested in what's coming next. Uh,
Hmm.
but I'll see all the rough edges, and in film, it really doesn't matter, because the moment the moment you start paying attention to the score, you're not in
Hmm.
the story.
That's true.
And if you're not in the story, the music is not doing the job it's supposed to do, which is support the story. So that's the dividing line. I mean, if you're in the story, it doesn't really matter what the music is, what genre or who writes it or whatever it is. If it fits the story that's being told, you hit a home run.
I'm excited to ask this then. I usually like to play this kind of game where they say, "What would be your theme song when you enter a room?" What would be your theme song, Chris, when you enter a room? Would it be one to heal? Would it be one energetic? Would it be one to satisfy? Would it be one to what?
Man, I have no idea. I have honest to God, I would have no answer, because I mean, the music that I've written through my life and that I've been a part of, it's transitory,
Mm,
and I don't identify with a specific piece of music, because it's associated with the story that's being told and my
mhm.
emotions at that given time. So it's always changing. It's always different.
I always told people that my theme song would be "Unsolved Mysteries" with Rubber Stack, but it changed to some other songs, but it always changes. So, so Chris, what is your ultimate vision for SoundBridge Health? Like, if you're fully successful, how will you have changed this landscape of mental wellness in 10 years?
Um, I haven't really defined or thought about that, but to answer your question, if 10 years from now I'll be 81 years old,
Wow,
okay?
you don't look 71. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Um, my goal, immediate goal, is to launch SoundBridge, get it into the market, and to start helping people. and then beyond that, if it takes hold, then I can say I had a life well spent. If it takes hold in the marketplace. Because at the end of the day, all of my music career is more personal. This is more about what I can give as opposed to what I can take. So, a specific result. I have a woman who I'm working with who lost her husband, and I told her, I said, well, listen, she, after talking with her, she put on her CD player all the music that she and her husband listened to. And she plays it as her soundtrack during the day. And she said, you changed my life. I mean, that's my reward is am I able to help people? Did they have a positive result? It's not about fame, fortune, notoriety. Really, it's nothing about that. It's more about, for me, about are my efforts helping people? And in this case, it's about using music as a tool to be able to support authentic connections with other human beings.
Chris, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to rearrange my playlist. So each playlist has a song in there that keeps me, because I wouldn't want to listen to something like I'm feeling good and suddenly, whoa, what was this I added?
Yeah.
I have a great closer question for you. But everyone, thank you, Chris, for joining us on the podcast. Everything will be linked down below. For the musicians and composers listening, how can they begin to use their skills not just for entertainment, but for creating genuine healing and wellness in their communities?
Well, number one, keep doing it. Don't stop. And the other part of it is to understand you bring more value to the world than you can possibly imagine just by doing what you do. Right? I mean, it's a very noble job. It's not something to be discounted. If and the people who stick are the ones who are there for the work, not for the reward. And that's why you get into doing it to begin with. And then as you get older, and you think, well, how am I going to make a living? How am I going to pay my bills? That's not why you do it. If you need to get a job to pay your bills, well, you need to get a job. I mean, there's no shame or anything like that. Don't expect the music business or the business model around music to be something that you can manipulate to remove the fear that you feel by an insecurity that, oh my God, how am I going to pay the rent? Not going to happen. Steve Martin, his advice to breaking into show business is be so good they can't ignore you. Right?
I like that.
Right. So in terms of, in communities and using your gifts to help people, realize that the value proposition and the reward is coming from a different place. The 20th century is all about climbing the ladder and making a lot of money and all the rest of that. It's going to be different moving forward. If you are, this gets into a sociological stance here. It says what we're witnessing and all the disruption and all the chaos in the world is we're at the end of the industrial age. All the norms that have sustained us for maybe 300 years are under attack. And they won't exist 10 years from now. So we have the opportunity once in human history to actually be able to define what it means to be human moving forward. And to my way of thinking, the people who can make music, write music, perform in a way that connects with people on a deep personal emotional level will
Wow.
become unbelievably valuable. That is a human skill that a machine can't replace.
Hmm.
Now, people, is it possible? Well, maybe not in my lifetime, but yes, maybe. But there's still, what binds a, what has separated human beings from the animal kingdom
Mhm.
is the ability to form communities and to trust other people. And that trust is what says, oh, I can't do this, but so and so can do that. I'm going to trust them to do that because I can't. And that's the power of community, to be able to elevate the standing of a species. I mean, what did Steve Jobs talk about? As individual performance, Condor is like top 3 and humans are like way down the list in terms of physically what humans are capable of. However, you put a human on a bike and it just destroys the competition, right? So survival of humanity as a species as we have known it is going to depend on our ability to connect with other human beings, because that connection creates the trust that is generated by that connection creates intimacy, and you cannot have that trust without the intimacy. So in terms of, do I make music in my community? Absolutely. But the focus shouldn't be on selling 1 million records or getting like 1 million views on YouTube.
Yeah.
The goal should be, are you facilitating the connection between other people? And you will find, this is one of my core beliefs, you will find that is valuable enough to where people will say, you improved my life, I will support you monetarily.
That reminds me of that scene in the Alistair Sim version of Christmas Carol when Jacob Marley says, um, money was not my business, people were my business. You invest
Yeah,
in
well,
people. Yeah.
right. So as AI continues to grow exponentially, excuse me, 1 second. I'm going to take a little drink of water here.
Sure. Really lovely interview, by the way. I really appreciate this.
Oh, my
You changed
pleasure.
my life.
Oh man. Well, as Mark Mothersbaugh said to me once, when I complimented him on a Devo performance, he said, "Only doing my duty." But I mean, there's a role to play for
Hmm.
musicians and creators. The tools will change, but the role is communication and connection. So if I were to give anybody advice about what to do going forward, make that be your mantra. Make that be your goal. How do I connect with people? What do I have to do to connect with another human being? Am I capable of it? If I'm not, that's okay. That means that I have to do something else. And there's no shame in that either, right? But that's the goal. And the more people that value, one of the big questions that I've had for many years is, what is the role of art going to be in a machine-driven world? Because traditionally art has been used as connective tissue to communicate with people, right? And so now that we're on the edge of what is personal expression going to mean moving forward?
Better watch it, because 20 years from now, they'll say, well, you know what? AI and androids and robots don't have any talent. Humans have the talent. Okay, well, why don't we just merge you two, become like the Terminator, where you can be your
Well,
machine
interesting.
and
You
you
should
can.
mention that. I was introduced to a book about 5-6 years ago, um, called Homo Deus by a Israeli professor named Yuval Harari.
Mm.
And he made a very compelling case that in 30 to 40 years, we'll become cyborgs. We'll
Nice
be the
cyborg.
Borg. You will be assimilated,
Yeah, the Borg, right?
right? And so it's kind of like I said, we're in this unique position in human history to be able to actually design. And the thing about it that I find exciting for the younger artist, you get to be at the front of the line. You're not trying to climb the ladder in a mature marketplace. You get to build it yourself. So to me, the opportunity is endless. You'll get stuck in thinking their opportunity is gone if you attach yourself to a status quo business model.
I know this is probably an odd question. You're probably like, do you think Amish and Mennonites are more like Amish would exist in 100 years because won't we be forced to go and use technology and AI and all that?
All depends on what their goals are. I mean, didn't researchers discover tribes in the Philippines or in Southeast
Yeah,
Asia that had lived for thousands of years without changing?
that's it. Yeah, yeah.
Right? You can exist. It just all depends on how much you want. How big a bite of the apple you want to see. See here again, it comes down to what's important to you. Is climbing the ladder, acquiring wealth, and notoriety, is that your goal, or is it survival and peace of mind? I mean, look at Native Americans, for example. They lived in North America for thousands of years without having to depend on modern technology. And they were happy. They had their own culture. And the
That's true.
Europeans
Yeah,
came along and just said, nope, that's not the way the world works. And so that ended. So
yeah.
I see those as being the stakes that we're facing.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
and an interesting thing to remember, a little factoid: music predates human language.
It actually
Humans
does. Yeah.
humans have used music to communicate longer than they've used language. So
Mm-hmm.
that should say, well, there's some staying power to music. When you think all is lost, all you're really losing is a business model.
Yeah.
All that's changing are the tools that enables you to be able to make music in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Wow. You've really blessed me with this interview, Chris. I really appreciate that. It's like awesome. So I'm
Uh,
hoping that when I post this on the platform, the people will just gravitate towards this episode because it's fantastic.
oh
Thank you
man,
so
thank you.
much, my friend.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Well,
so much.
it's my pleasure. My job these days is in the past it was always about being a doer, but
Mm.
now it's more about inspiring people. You
You
know,
certainly inspired me to look at things differently. Thank you. Love it.
and
I love it.
soundbridgehealth.com is where you can find the program. We're
Yep.
pre-launched. That looks to be, we're hoping to get this out into the market in the first quarter of next year,
Sounds good.
and
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 I'll
and hopefully help a lot of people.
yeah. And I'll try to have this out at least in November sometime. But yeah,
Hey,
appreciate this, man.
whenever, I'm just happy to be here, have the platform.
I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Okay, wait right there, Chris. Okay, everyone, we're gonna end this stream. Bye, Chris. Thank you for
Goodbye.
joining us. Bye.
Thank you.